June 18, 1815. The fields south of Brussels had turned into a sea of mud after a night of relentless rain. Thousands of soldiers stood silently beneath dark, threatening clouds. Muskets were damp. Cannon wheels sank deep into the soaked earth. Every man understood that before sunset, Europe itself might be reborn or destroyed. Across the battlefield stood a man whose name had become synonymous with victory. Napoleon Bonaparte, the conqueror of Europe, the emperor whose armies had shattered kingdoms, humbled emperors, and rewritten the map of an entire continent. For more than 15 years, Europe had searched desperately for someone capable of stopping him. Kingdom after kingdom had fallen. Army after army had been crushed. Generals who believed themselves brilliant discovered too late that Napoleon was always one step ahead. Yet on this day, one man calmly waited for him. Not a king, not an emperor, not a revolutionary hero, but a disciplined British general whose greatest weapon was not boldness, but patience. His name was Arthur Wellesley. History would remember him as the Duke of Wellington. By the end of that day, Napoleon's empire would exist only in memory. But Waterloo was not the beginning of Wellington's story. It was the final chapter of a journey that had begun decades earlier, far from Belgium, long before Europe had even heard Napoleon's name. To understand why Wellington became the man who defeated history's greatest military genius, we must travel back to the beginning. Arthur Wellesley was born on May 1, 1769, into an Anglo-Irish aristocratic family. His family possessed noble titles but far less wealth than their status suggested. Like many noble households, they carried expectations that often exceeded their finances. As a child, Arthur showed little sign of future greatness. Unlike famous military prodigies, he was neither celebrated for extraordinary intelligence nor admired for exceptional charisma. Teachers described him as quiet, reserved, sometimes even unremarkable. His own mother reportedly believed he would never achieve anything significant. For many families, such judgments would have become lifelong burdens. For Arthur, they became silent motivation. Instead of seeking attention, he developed habits that would define him forever. Discipline, observation, self-control. While other boys chased excitement, Arthur carefully watched the world around him. He noticed patterns. He remembered details. He rarely acted impulsively. These qualities seemed ordinary during childhood. On future battlefields, they would become priceless. Like many younger sons of noble families, Arthur had limited opportunities. The family estate would not belong to him. Political influence alone could not guarantee success. Military service appeared to offer the clearest path toward honor. In 1787, at just 18 years old, Arthur purchased a commission as an ensign in the British Army. At the time, Britain's officer system often favored wealth and family connections. Many officers viewed military service as little more than a social obligation. Arthur approached it differently. He studied constantly. He examined logistics. He analyzed supply systems. He learned about discipline, administration, and organization. Many young officers dreamed about glorious charges across open fields. Arthur became fascinated by something far less glamorous. How armies actually survived. How food reached soldiers. How roads affected movement. How weather influenced campaigns. Years later, Napoleon himself would say that an army marches on its stomach. Arthur had already begun mastering exactly that lesson. Everything changed in 1797. Arthur Wellesley sailed for India. Few Europeans realized it then, but India would become the greatest military academy of his life. The British East India Company was expanding rapidly, facing powerful Indian kingdoms whose armies were experienced, determined, and often formidable. Unlike Europe, where campaigns sometimes followed familiar conventions, warfare in India demanded flexibility. The climate could kill as effectively as enemy bullets. Monsoon rains transformed roads into rivers. Heat exhausted soldiers before battles even began. Distances stretched supply lines beyond imagination. Every mistake became expensive. Arthur learned quickly. Instead of relying on courage alone, he focused on preparation. Every march was carefully organized. Every supply wagon counted. every route examined, every day's food carefully planned. Some fellow officers considered such attention excessive. Arthur ignored them. He understood something many commanders never learned. Battles were often decided long before the first shot was fired. Success did not come immediately. Like every great commander, Arthur experienced mistakes. One early campaign taught him painful lessons about reconnaissance, communication, and battlefield coordination. Rather than blaming subordinates or making excuses, he examined every error honestly. He asked difficult questions. Why had intelligence failed? Why had units become separated? How could logistics improve? Failure became his teacher. Unlike arrogant commanders who believed themselves naturally gifted, Arthur constantly refined his methods. This willingness to learn would later separate him from many of Napoleon's opponents. Some generals repeated mistakes. Arthur almost never repeated the same mistake twice. In September 1803, Arthur faced perhaps the greatest challenge of his career so far: the Battle of Waterloo. His force numbered fewer than 5,000 infantry supported by cavalry and artillery. Facing him stood an enemy many times larger. Thousands of cavalry, hundreds of guns, experienced warriors defending their territory. Many commanders would have withdrawn. Arthur chose something far more dangerous. He attacked, but it was not reckless courage. Before giving the order, he had spent hours studying the battlefield. He identified a crossing the enemy believed impossible. He moved his army unexpectedly. He forced his opponents to react rather than dictate events. The fighting became brutal. British regiments suffered terrible casualties. Entire formations seemed moments away from collapse. Arthur himself rode repeatedly through enemy fire. Several horses were shot beneath him during the campaign. Yet he remained astonishingly calm. Instead of chasing dramatic victories, he constantly reinforced weak points. He shifted reserves where needed. He maintained discipline even as chaos consumed the battlefield. Eventually, the enemy line broke. Against overwhelming odds, Arthur had achieved victory. Years later, after Waterloo had made him famous across the world, Wellington would still describe Waterloo as perhaps the finest battle he had ever fought. Not because it brought him the greatest fame, but because it demanded everything he had learned: preparation, flexibility, patience, leadership. Most victorious generals became increasingly aggressive. Success often created overconfidence. Arthur developed the opposite habit. Each victory made him more cautious. He understood that luck always played some role in war. Therefore, he refused to depend upon it. Instead of searching for spectacular attacks, he searched for certainty. He avoided unnecessary risks. He refused battles fought on unfavorable ground. He insisted upon reliable intelligence. He demanded disciplined soldiers. Many critics considered him too cautious. History would prove otherwise. His caution was never weakness. It was calculation. Arthur wanted victories that could not easily become disasters. That philosophy would later frustrate Napoleon himself. By 1805, Europe was changing rapidly. Across the continent, one name inspired both admiration and terror: Napoleon Bonaparte. The French emperor had defeated coalition after coalition. Austria had fallen. Prussia had collapsed. Russian armies had suffered devastating defeats. Entire kingdoms disappeared almost overnight. French marshals seemed unstoppable. Every victory expanded Napoleon's empire. Every campaign strengthened the myth that he was invincible. Britain remained defiant. Protected by the Royal Navy, the island could not easily be invaded. But on land, Britain still needed commanders capable of confronting Napoleon's greatest generals. Arthur Wellesley was returning home. The experience he had gained in India had transformed him completely. He was no longer an inexperienced officer. He had become a commander who understood logistics better than almost anyone in Europe. He knew how to preserve an army. He knew how to choose battlefields. Most importantly, he knew when not to fight. Soon, destiny would place him where Europe needed him most: the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal, Spain. A war that would last 6 brutal years. A war that would slowly destroy the French Empire long before Waterloo. And there, Arthur Wellesley would earn the reputation that eventually carried him to history's most famous battlefield. But before he could defeat Napoleon, he first had to defeat Napoleon's greatest marshals. In 1808, Europe was living under the shadow of one man. Napoleon Bonaparte had defeated nearly every major power on the continent. His armies marched with astonishing speed, his marshals were feared across Europe, and many believed the French emperor was simply unbeatable. Only Britain remained beyond his grasp. Unable to invade the British Isles after his naval defeat at Trafalgar, Napoleon turned to another strategy. He would strangle Britain economically. The continental system was designed to cut Britain off from European trade. Every nation under French influence was expected to close its ports to British merchants. Portugal refused. For Napoleon, that was unacceptable. French armies crossed Spain and invaded Portugal in 1807. What appeared to be a simple occupation soon became one of the greatest mistakes of Napoleon's career, because Britain sent a commander unlike any the French had faced before. Arthur Wellesley. When Wellesley landed in Portugal in August 1808, he did not promise glorious victories. He promised preparation. His soldiers immediately noticed the difference. Every supply wagon was inspected. Every route was studied. Every bridge was measured. Every possible retreat was planned before any advance. Many officers believed such caution slowed the army. Wellesley believed it kept armies alive. Unlike many commanders who focused only on defeating the enemy, Wellesley constantly asked another question. What happens after we win? How would wounded soldiers be evacuated? Where would ammunition come from? Could reinforcements arrive in time? Would enough food remain for another month? These questions rarely appeared in heroic paintings. Yet they often determined who ultimately won wars. Only weeks after arriving, Wellesley faced French General Junot near the village of Vimero. The French attacked aggressively. It was exactly what Wellesley expected. Instead of charging forward, British infantry occupied strong defensive positions on high ground. French columns advanced confidently. Drums echoed across the hills. Flags waved proudly above thousands of soldiers. Then the British opened fire. Disciplined volleys tore through the advancing French formations. Before one line finished firing, another stepped forward. Smoke filled the battlefield. The French attacked again and again. Each assault met the same devastating response. When the battle ended, Junot's army had been defeated. It was Wellesley's first major victory in Europe. Yet even after winning, politics interfered. Senior officers who outranked him arrived after the battle and negotiated the Convention of Sintra, allowing defeated French troops to return home. The decision outraged Britain. Although Wellesley was eventually cleared of responsibility, he learned another important lesson. Victory on the battlefield did not always guarantee political success. By 1809, Wellesley returned to command British forces in Portugal. This time he intended to stay. Napoleon underestimated him. French marshals believed the British army could eventually be driven into the sea. Instead, they found themselves facing an opponent who refused to fight on unfavorable terms. Whenever French commanders advanced with overwhelming numbers, Wellesley simply withdrew. He abandoned territory without panic. He sacrificed cities to preserve his army. Critics accused him of cowardice. French marshals believed they were forcing him backward. In reality, they were walking exactly where he wanted them to go. In July 1809, Wellesley fought one of his hardest battles, Talavera. French attacks came repeatedly throughout the day. Veteran soldiers marched through blistering heat. Cannons thundered across dry Spanish fields. Entire British regiments suffered terrible casualties. More than once, French troops came dangerously close to breaking Wellington's lines. Yet he remained calm. Witnesses described him riding slowly behind his formations. No shouting. No panic. No dramatic speeches. Simply quiet confidence. When commanders rushed to report crises, he listened carefully before giving short, precise orders. His composure spread throughout the army. Soldiers later recalled that if Wellington looked calm, they believed everything would be all right. The French eventually withdrew. The victory earned Arthur Wellesley a new title, He became Viscount Wellington. Soon, Europe would know him simply as Wellington. Despite his victories, Wellington understood a brutal truth. He still lacked the manpower to destroy Napoleon's empire. If Napoleon personally arrived with a massive army, Portugal might still fall. So Wellington prepared something extraordinary. Around Lisbon, engineers secretly constructed one of history's greatest defensive systems. The lines of Torres Vedras, hundreds of forts, miles of earthworks, hidden artillery positions, roadblocks, signal stations, supply depots. Entire villages were evacuated. Food was removed, crops destroyed. Anything that could feed a French army disappeared. The project remained one of the greatest military secrets of the age. Even many British officers knew little about its full scale. When French Marshal André Massena invaded Portugal in 1810 with more than 60,000 experienced soldiers, he expected another campaign of rapid victories. Instead, he found nothing. No supplies, no food, no easy victories. Then he reached Wellington's hidden fortifications. The French stared in disbelief. The defensive lines stretched across the landscape, strong enough to stop almost any assault. Massena hesitated. Every day his army grew weaker. Food became scarce. Disease spread rapidly. Desertion increased. Without firing one decisive battle, Wellington was destroying one of Napoleon's finest armies. After months of frustration, the French retreated, hungry, exhausted, defeated. It was one of the greatest strategic victories of the entire Napoleonic Wars. For years, French armies had advanced across Europe almost without resistance. Now the situation changed. Wellington began moving forward. One fortress after another fell. French supply lines became vulnerable. Spanish guerrillas attacked isolated garrisons. Every mile deeper into Spain became more dangerous for Napoleon's marshals. The hunter had become the hunted. French commanders expected spectacular battles. Instead, Wellington offered relentless pressure. Every mistake was punished. Every retreat became expensive. Every victory cost the French more soldiers than they could replace. Napoleon himself was becoming increasingly distracted. In 1812, he launched his disastrous invasion of Russia. More than 500,000 soldiers marched east. Only a fraction would return. The catastrophe weakened the French Empire everywhere. Wellington immediately recognized the opportunity. On July 22, 1812, Wellington finally saw the opening he had waited years to exploit. Near Salamanca, French commanders made a fatal mistake. One section of their army advanced too far ahead of the rest. Most generals might have hesitated. Wellington reacted instantly. According to witnesses, he observed the French movement for only a few moments before declaring, "By God, that will do." Orders raced across the battlefield. British divisions surged forward. The isolated French flank collapsed. The attack spread like a chain reaction through Napoleon's army. By sunset, another French force had been shattered. The victory electrified Europe. For the first time, it seemed entirely possible that Napoleon's armies could be beaten consistently on land. The myth of French invincibility was beginning to crack. June 21, 1813, near the Spanish city of Vitoria, Wellington fought the battle that truly changed the war. King Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's own brother, commanded the French army. Behind him stretched an enormous convoy carrying treasure, artwork, weapons, and supplies gathered during years of occupation. Wellington attacked from multiple directions. French formations struggled to coordinate. Roads became blocked with wagons. Officers lost communication. Entire units became trapped. Panic spread. Soon, the retreat turned into chaos. Thousands of wagons were abandoned. Cannons were left behind. Treasures collected across Spain fell into Allied hands. The defeat at Vitoria destroyed French control of Spain forever. When Napoleon received news of the disaster, he reportedly exploded with anger. Years of conquest had collapsed in a single campaign. The Peninsular War had become what Napoleon himself later called the Spanish ulcer. It had consumed soldiers, money, supplies, and time that the French Empire could never recover. And the man responsible stood quietly among the victorious army. Arthur Wellesley, soon promoted to Field Marshal, soon to become Duke of Wellington. For the first time since the Revolutionary Wars began, Allied armies crossed into France itself. The impossible had happened. Napoleon's empire was shrinking. French cities prepared for invasion. Across Europe, kingdoms rose once more against the emperor. Austria returned to war. Prussia rebuilt its armies. Russia marched westward after surviving the terrible campaign of 1812. Napoleon was now fighting enemies on every front. In 1814, Paris fell. Napoleon abdicated. The emperor who had dominated Europe for nearly 2 decades was sent into exile on the island of Elba. Europe celebrated. Church bells rang across countless cities. Kings reclaimed their thrones. People believed the wars were finally over. Wellington returned to diplomacy, attending the Congress of Vienna alongside Europe's most powerful statesmen. But peace would not last. Far away on a small Mediterranean island, one man refused to accept defeat. One man still believed destiny had chosen him: Napoleon Bonaparte. And in less than a year, Europe would once again descend into chaos. The emperor would escape Elba. France would rally behind him. The Allied powers would race to stop him before he rebuilt his empire. Only one commander stood directly in his path: Arthur Wellesley. Their final meeting was no longer a question of if, only when. And the world would remember that meeting by one unforgettable name: Waterloo. For nearly a year, Europe believed the nightmare was over. Napoleon Bonaparte had abdicated. The Bourbons had returned to the French throne. The great powers gathered in Vienna, redrawing the map of Europe and celebrating what they hoped would be a lasting peace. Arthur Wellesley, now the Duke of Wellington, had exchanged his battlefield uniform for the elegant attire of a diplomat. He represented Britain at the Congress of Vienna, helping shape the continent's future through negotiation rather than war. It seemed his military career had reached its conclusion. Then, on February 26, 1815, everything changed. Napoleon escaped from the island of Elba. With only a small group of loyal followers, he sailed to France. The French government ordered troops to arrest him. Instead, something astonishing happened. When royal soldiers confronted Napoleon, he stepped forward alone, opened his coat, and declared, "If any man among you wishes to kill his emperor, here I stand." No one fired. One by one, the soldiers joined him. As Napoleon marched toward Paris, more regiments abandoned the king. Within weeks, King Louis XVIII fled the country. Without fighting a major battle, Napoleon reclaimed France. Europe was stunned. The peace they had celebrated had lasted less than a year. The great powers immediately declared Napoleon an outlaw. This time, there would be no negotiations, no treaties, no compromise. Napoleon had to be defeated forever. Napoleon understood his situation perfectly. France could not survive another long war against all of Europe. Russia, Austria, Prussia, and Britain were preparing enormous armies. If they united, France would be overwhelmed. His only chance was speed. He would strike before the coalition armies combined. His first target lay in Belgium. 2 armies waited there. One commanded by the Duke of Wellington, the other by the Prussian Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher. If Napoleon could defeat them separately, he might force Europe back to the negotiating table. It was a bold plan. It had worked many times before. But this campaign would be different, because Wellington understood Napoleon better than any Allied commander. On June 15, 1815, the French army crossed into Belgium. More than 120,000 veteran soldiers advanced rapidly. Napoleon moved with his familiar speed. His objective was clear: separate Wellington and Blücher. Destroy them one at a time. The campaign began exactly as Napoleon intended. French forces pushed deep into Allied territory. Confusion spread among coalition headquarters. Orders crossed paths. Messengers rode desperately through the countryside. On June 16th, Napoleon defeated the Prussians at the Battle of Ligny. It was his final battlefield victory. Although Blücher's army suffered heavy losses, it was not destroyed. Meanwhile, another fierce battle erupted at Quatre Bras. Wellington managed to hold his position against Marshal Ney. The fighting prevented Napoleon from crushing either Allied army completely. That small failure would become one of the most important moments of the campaign. After Quatre Bras, Wellington ordered a deliberate withdrawal. Some critics believed he was retreating in defeat. Napoleon believed the British were losing confidence. Neither was true. Wellington had already chosen where he wanted the decisive battle to occur: a ridge near the small Belgian village of Waterloo. The position was almost perfect. A gentle slope concealed much of his infantry. French artillery would struggle to inflict maximum damage. Strong farms, Hougoumont, La Haye-Sainte, and Pepla guarded key approaches. Behind the ridge, reserves could move unseen. Wellington had studied terrain throughout his career. He believed the ground itself could become another army. Now it would. On the evening of June 17th, a violent thunderstorm swept across Belgium. Rain poured relentlessly. Roads became rivers of mud. Fields turned into swamps. Cannons could barely move. Horses struggled to pull artillery. Napoleon wanted to attack immediately. The soaked ground forced him to wait. That delay proved priceless. Every passing hour allowed the Prussians to march closer. Throughout the night, Wellington rode quietly along his lines. He spoke with officers, inspected positions, encouraged exhausted soldiers. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic promises, only calm confidence. One officer later recalled that Wellington behaved as though tomorrow would be entirely ordinary. His composure spread through the army. If their commander remained calm, perhaps they could survive. Dawn arrived beneath gray skies. Across the battlefield stood two extraordinary commanders. Napoleon, the greatest offensive genius of his age. Wellington, the master of defensive warfare. Nearly 200,000 soldiers would soon decide the fate of Europe. Napoleon delayed the attack until late morning, hoping the ground would dry enough for artillery to operate effectively. That decision gave Blücher even more time. Around 11:30 a.m., the French guns finally opened fire. The Battle of Waterloo had begun. Napoleon intended the attack on Hougoumont to distract Wellington. Instead, it became a deadly trap. French infantry repeatedly assaulted the walled farmhouse. British guards fought desperately behind thick stone walls. Trees caught fire. Buildings burned. Smoke covered the battlefield. The struggle lasted almost the entire day. Thousands of French soldiers poured into attacks that achieved almost nothing. What was supposed to be a diversion became a massive drain on Napoleon's strength. Wellington later remarked that the outcome of the battle depended greatly upon holding Hougoumont. Again and again, the defenders refused to yield. Around midday, Napoleon launched his main attack. Thousands of French infantry advanced in dense columns toward Wellington's center. Drums echoed across the valley. Eagles glittered above blue uniforms. It was an awe-inspiring sight. Yet Wellington remained behind the ridge. His soldiers waited silently. French artillery thundered overhead. Many cannonballs passed above the hidden infantry. When the French reached the crest, British lines suddenly appeared. Volley after volley crashed into the advancing columns. Disciplined musket fire shattered French momentum. Then came the counterattack. British infantry surged forward with bayonets. The French recoiled. Napoleon's first great assault had failed. Sensing an opportunity, British heavy cavalry charged downhill. The Household Brigade, the Union Brigade. Massive horses thundered across the muddy field. French infantry broke before them. Eagles were captured. Entire formations collapsed. For a few glorious moments, victory seemed within reach. But success turned into disaster. The British cavalry rode too far. Instead of stopping, they continued deep into French lines. Napoleon unleashed his own cavalry. The exhausted British horsemen were surrounded. Many never returned. It was a painful reminder. Even triumph could become catastrophe without discipline. By late afternoon, Marshal Michel Ney believed Wellington's army was retreating. He was mistaken. Without waiting for proper infantry support, Ney ordered one of history's largest cavalry attacks. Wave after wave of French horsemen climbed the ridge. Thousands of cavalry charged directly toward the British line. Instead of fleeing, Wellington's infantry formed squares. Each square became a fortress of bayonets. French cavalry circled endlessly. Horses refused to throw themselves onto walls of steel. Cannons fired. Muskets roared. Again and again, the cavalry attacked. Again and again, the squares held. It was one of the greatest demonstrations of infantry discipline in military history. Napoleon watched precious cavalry disappear without decisive results. Then came the moment Napoleon had feared all morning. Reports reached headquarters. Prussian troops had appeared on the French right flank. Blücher had kept his promise. Despite defeat at Ligny, despite exhaustion, despite terrible roads, the Prussians had arrived. Napoleon immediately diverted thousands of soldiers to stop them. Now he faced two armies instead of one. The balance of the battle had changed forever. Yet the struggle was still far from over. Late in the afternoon, French troops finally captured the farmhouse of La Haye-Sainte. For a moment, victory seemed possible. French artillery moved closer. Wellington's center came under devastating fire. Some Allied units began to waver. The Duke himself rode constantly along the line. Expressionless. Dust covered his uniform. Several officers urged retreat. He refused. According to witnesses, Wellington quietly replied that all he needed was night or Blücher. Soon he would have both. As daylight began to fade, Napoleon made his final decision. He committed the Imperial Guard, his most elite soldiers, men who had followed him across Europe, veterans who had almost never known defeat. If they succeeded, Waterloo might still be won. The Guard advanced slowly uphill. Perfect discipline. Perfect formation. Across the battlefield, soldiers whispered in fear. "The Guard is coming." Wellington waited until the last possible moment. Then he reportedly gave the order. "Now, Maitland, now's your time." British guards rose from behind the ridge. At point-blank range, they unleashed devastating volleys. The Imperial Guard staggered. More fire followed. Then came the counterattack. For the first time in history, the Imperial Guard broke. A cry spread rapidly across the battlefield. "La Garde recule!" The Guard is retreating. Moments later, another shout echoed even louder. "La Garde recule! Sauve caput! The Guard is retreating! Save yourselves!" French morale collapsed. The impossible had happened. Napoleon's greatest soldiers had been defeated. Across the battlefield, Wellington stood in his stirrups, removed his hat, and waved it forward. It was the signal. The entire Allied line advanced. The French army began to disintegrate, but Napoleon himself was still alive. And before this extraordinary day ended, the Emperor would make his final escape into history. As darkness settled over the fields of Waterloo on June 18, 1815, the French army ceased to exist as a fighting force. What had begun that morning as one of the finest armies in Europe was now a mass of exhausted, frightened men fleeing in every direction. Cannons were abandoned. Supply wagons overturned. Muskets littered the muddy roads. For years, Europe had watched Napoleon's enemies collapse beneath the relentless pressure of his campaigns. Now, for the first time, it was Napoleon's own soldiers who were running. The arrival of Blücher's Prussian army transformed retreat into complete disaster. Prussian cavalry relentlessly pursued the fleeing French throughout the night. There would be no orderly withdrawal, no opportunity to regroup, no second chance. The emperor who had conquered Europe was escaping with only a handful of loyal followers. The legend of Napoleon Bonaparte had been broken forever. Victory at Waterloo was celebrated across Europe. Yet Wellington himself showed little joy. As he rode across the battlefield after the fighting ended, the full cost of victory became painfully clear. Thousands of dead and wounded soldiers covered the fields. British, French, Belgian, German, Prussian. Many still cried out for water or medical help. Others lay silently where they had fallen. Years later, Wellington famously remarked, "Nothing except a battle lost can be half so melancholy as a battle won." It was a remarkable statement from one of history's greatest generals. Unlike many commanders who glorified war, Wellington understood its terrible human cost. He knew every victory was purchased with lives that could never be replaced. That perspective made him different from many military heroes celebrated throughout history. Napoleon returned briefly to Paris. He hoped to rally France once more. But the political situation had changed completely. The government no longer believed victory was possible. Support disappeared. Within days, Napoleon abdicated for the second and final time. This time there would be no island close to Europe. No opportunity for another return. The British transported him thousands of miles into the South Atlantic. His destination was St. Helena, a lonely volcanic island surrounded by endless ocean. Escape would be almost impossible. There, under constant British supervision, Napoleon spent the final years of his life reflecting on the empire he had built and lost. He died in 1821. His age of conquest had come to an end. When Wellington returned home, Britain welcomed him as a national hero. Crowds lined the streets. Church bells rang. Portraits of the Duke appeared throughout the country. His victory at Waterloo was viewed as the moment Britain had helped save Europe. But Wellington did not behave like a conquering celebrity. He remained disciplined, reserved, professional. He rarely exaggerated his own achievements. When praised for Waterloo, he consistently reminded people that thousands of soldiers from many nations had earned that victory together. It was never simply his triumph. It belonged to the Allied army. That humility only increased the respect people felt for him. Unlike many famous generals, Wellington did not retire after the war. Instead, he entered politics. He served in several important government positions before eventually becoming Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in 1828. Politics proved very different from warfare. On the battlefield, clear decisions often produced clear results. In Parliament, every issue required negotiation, compromise, and debate. Many of Wellington's policies were controversial. Some praised his determination. Others criticized his conservative views. Yet even political opponents respected his honesty and personal integrity. Perhaps his greatest political achievement came when he supported Catholic emancipation in 1829. Although many of his traditional supporters opposed the measure, Wellington believed refusing reform could lead Britain toward dangerous unrest. It was another example of his practical leadership. He often chose what he believed was necessary rather than what was popular. Historians have long debated Wellington's military style. He was not as aggressive as Napoleon. He rarely sought spectacular victories. He disliked unnecessary risks. Some critics once claimed he was simply lucky. But careful study tells a different story. Again and again, Wellington selected strong defensive ground. Again and again, he preserved his army while wearing down his enemies. Again and again, superior logistics allowed his soldiers to fight when others could not. He understood something timeless. Battles are rarely won by courage alone. They are won through preparation, discipline, planning, leadership. His campaigns in India, Portugal, Spain, and Belgium all reflected the same philosophy. Win intelligently, not recklessly. That consistency made him one of history's most successful commanders. History often remembers Wellington because he defeated Napoleon. But the relationship between the two men is more fascinating than simple rivalry. They met only once on the battlefield, Waterloo. Yet each represented a completely different philosophy of war. Napoleon believed in speed, surprise, bold attacks, decisive offensives. Wellington believed in patience, preparation, strong defensive positions, perfect timing. One sought victory through overwhelming momentum, the other through careful control. Neither philosophy was inherently superior. Both had produced extraordinary success. But at Waterloo, under those unique conditions, Wellington's method proved stronger. The battlefield, the weather, the discipline of the Allied army, and the arrival of the Prussians combined to create the perfect storm that ended Napoleon's ambitions forever. After decades of public service, Wellington gradually withdrew from active political life. Yet he remained one of Britain's most respected public figures. Young officers sought his advice. Foreign leaders requested his opinions. Veterans continued to admire the commander who had shared so many hardships with them. Even in old age, he maintained the disciplined habits that had defined his entire career. Early mornings, simple routines, constant attention to duty. On September 14, 1852, Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, died at the age of 83. Britain mourned deeply. His funeral became one of the largest state ceremonies in the nation's history. He was buried with the highest honors in St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Millions remembered him not simply as a victorious general, but as the man who had helped preserve the balance of Europe during one of its darkest eras. More than 2 centuries have passed since the guns of Waterloo fell silent. Empires have risen. Empires have collapsed. New wars have reshaped the world. Yet the names Napoleon and Wellington remain forever linked. One dreamed of ruling Europe. The other stood in his way. Their confrontation lasted only a single day, but its consequences shaped the continent for generations. The Battle of Waterloo was not merely the end of one emperor. It marked the end of an entire age. It proved that discipline could overcome brilliance, that preparation could defeat ambition, and that even the greatest conqueror in history could be stopped. But Waterloo also leaves us with a timeless question. If Wellington had failed, if Napoleon had won just one more battle, how different would the modern world look today? That is the mystery of history. A single day, a single battlefield, 2 extraordinary commanders, and a decision that changed the fate of millions. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories about the greatest generals, legendary battles, and world-changing empires.